We get a lot of questions now about like standing desks and walking treadmills under our desks and some of this stuff. And I'm fairly unconventional in a lot of ways than what you hear about like with influencers online. One of those is like, no, I hate them both, and here is why. I would rather you get away from the computer, have no phone, no podcast, no music, no, go for a walk. Even if it's 10 minutes, let your brain sort of settle and refocus. And again, I think if you create that margin, this whole idea of welcome back to the Valley to Peak Nutrition Podcast. My guest this week is Kyle Zibrowski. Kyle is a friend of mine who I actually met in Bozeman at Tough Fest a couple of years ago. He lives in Boise, though, and so we've kind of remained friends throughout that. You'll find in this podcast that we just jump right in, and so there's no real introduction to who he is, but I will link his information below. He's got a great story and podcast himself on things. But one of the reasons I had Kyle on is, as Kyle talks about, he battled this long journey with alcoholism and had some spectacular takeaways on habits and behavior. And we dive into all sorts of really, really great stuff. And I think that you'll really enjoy it. But again, with no introduction, and that's on me. But as we started getting into it, it was honestly so good that I didn't want to break that stride and go back and have this awkward introduction. So you'll hear us sort of pick up midstream, and then we start talking about some really, really great stuff that not only alludes to alcohol, but also alludes to habit and behavior change, some really practical things for you to apply. You know, in creating habits, sometimes one of the most difficult things is you recognize that you may want to develop them, but just getting and building enough momentum to start creating those new habits can be a challenge. And so we touch on that and a number of other things, but I hope you enjoy it. I am positive you will take something from it. And here is Kyle and I talking through a number of different things about how to create new habits.
Going through that and just dealing with it, you know, it's like my mindset fell back into just like manipulate, like strike back at them. Like they hurt me, I need to lash out and hurt them. How do I get vengeance on them? And it took me a long time. Like honestly, it took me 9 months to like truly get over that and forgive them for it. And I feel sorry for them that they're in that position, but from that point on, it's just like I have to look at this relationship with him differently.
Wanting to ask you if you think that thought pattern or process is the byproduct of the alcoholism, let's call it that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I love it. And actually I think there's a way into that line of questioning. Honestly, with regards to like food and nutrition. So like one thing that I was thinking about as we came into this is just like so I went through what I would call like the early stages of recovery, which is like, okay, yeah, you've got momentum because physically you feel great and wonderful and life is coming back into your eyes. And then like things start to get hard and you have to face up and start doing work. And one of the aspects that I felt like I experienced and I see others go through is this need to address when emotional turmoil comes in, where those thought patterns go and how you cope with them. And so honestly, it's funny because like I'm thinking about coming on sort of a nutrition podcast. And I'm like, there was a big moment for me, time period for me over the holidays this year. This was the first year that I like did not overeat sweets. And one of the things that I recognized was I was doing it. I was going to sweets to sort of try to help make one deal with the stress of like the holidays that come, because it's all travel for us at this point. But then also it was like I was trying to make other people feel better, because like there's this, and this applies to not drinking as well. Like if someone asks you like, hey, you want a drink? You're like, no, I don't drink. There's sort of this air of discomfort where they're like, are you judging me because I'm drinking? And I had this with food, and I realized it was like this emotional kind of like instability, really, where it was like I was going to a bad habit, making myself not feel well because I wanted to soften the blow for others. I wanted to make others feel less guilty that they were going to the treats or something like that. So it's just been really interesting navigating sort of the emotional aspect of like alcoholism. Like on its face, it was intense cravings, urges, desires, almost always on my mind. Like I would have stretches of sobriety, but even during those stretches of sobriety, it's like I'm always thinking about drinking. And if I was taking a break from drinking, I was just continually telling myself, don't drink, don't drink, don't drink. And there is a process to get over that. But then it's like, well, how do you deal with the ups and downs of life where in the past you would have gone to alcohol, and like what are your thought patterns? And so my thought patterns like still today fall to like an eye for an eye kind of mentality instead of opting for like forgiveness when someone might make a misstep or something like that. And I'm very consciously over the last few months like focusing on how do I extend forgiveness, you know, in this case with like work, where it emotionally disrupts me. All it's doing when I'm withholding forgiveness, I found, is that I'm hurting myself. Like the other people generally don't really care all that much. So I kind of jumped all over there, but like the emotional aspect is huge for this.
So a question that I think would naturally come from this, and I'm just going with this at this point.
I love the slow roll start.
Um, is I think like from a practical standpoint, whether you relate it, actually, let's not relate it to alcoholism yet. I don't want to.
Yeah.
Let's thinking just about the holidays and the sweets and the idea of, okay, I am now starting to sacrifice the way that I feel, my own personal goals, all these other things, just at the expense to not make these people feel bad. And we don't even know if they feel that way. That
Right.
I think is a universal feeling among people, especially around the holidays. Oh, they handed me
Yep.
something even though I didn't want it. So that
Right.
from a practical standpoint, I think a good question is, having had walked that successfully, what did you do from a practical standpoint to feel like, okay, there was some sort of a change in thinking that then came by virtue of a habit, an action. I did something
Hmm.
to where that the outcome wasn't the same. Obviously I want to know what you did, but I think even more important than that, and I know you personally, so you think like this too. What's the thinking behind the action that you, or the boundaries that you put in place to where that didn't happen this year?
Yep. Yeah. So a lot of that came down to a lot of work in the realm of mindfulness. So not letting your actions be carried forward by some seemingly unconscious thought. Like before you take an action, are you able to disrupt that? Like sometimes literally with a pause. Like there was a time during the holidays where I walked up and there is like a spread of treats, just like all the cookies that got made by the grandparents, the nephews, things like that that are out spread out. And it was me alone. And it's like, okay, I found the ability through mindfulness practices, which are sort of those typical things like, and I think everyone has to find things that work for them. It's, you know, the meditation, the various breathing exercises. So cognitive behavior therapy, which is something that I did get through the rehab experience, it focuses specifically on like the disruption of those, call it mindless thoughts that lead to this action. And so just being able to take before any action, take a pause and going, okay, what is actually the driving force behind this? And is it just like some craving that I can offset another way? Is it me feeling stressed or anxious in the moment? I never was able to deal with anxiety, and I still think I have a lot of anxiety within me, and I'm able to recognize it more and address it. Like the funny thing about doing this podcast, like I actually you're gonna hear me ramble. I'm certain of that. But it's like I've stripped away the a lot of the fear of addressing and facing the anxiety. Whereas before I would feel it and it's like, I don't know what's causing this, but I want it to go away. Whereas now with like some mindfulness practice, it's like, okay, those kind of like anxious feelings, the heart rate, like increased breath rate, just kind of, I get super fidgety. And so if I start getting fidgety, it's, hey, recognize that, stop, and actually try to figure out like where it's coming from with all of this, and then make a decision on if you actually want to proceed with the action or not. And then another thing, this is a saying from the recovery world, is just do the next best thing. And I have found taking that approach has allowed me to be super forgiving of myself. And so it's like, if I do dive in to the sweets, stop. I don't have to continue on. Like before my state of mind, can I swear on the podcast, or will you just like bleep it out?
Do whatever you need to do.
Okay. So my thought pattern when I was an alcoholic, and this applies to many, many addicts, was it. And so in the past, I would cross that boundary, have the sweet in this instant, or decide that I was going to drink, and my mind would revert to it. And I would just completely lose myself. Whereas, now I'm very forgiving of missteps and mistakes that I make, knowing that if I catch them early, I can acknowledge them and go, okay, what's the next best thing in this instance?
Let me stop you, because all that's great, but I know for a fact there's going to be people that listen to this that say, that's really, really great, but the part that I struggle with is being able to stay aware enough, often enough to process in that way. Right. And so having had gone through like some of this thinking myself and having to break thought patterns over a variety of different topics, what I know that did not come, you didn't wake up one day and the next
Not
day
at all.
this became simple. So for someone that's listening to this and they're saying like, okay, that's great that you develop, like you keep using this word that says, and you keep using this word that says mindset, right? How did you move from not having that to all of this sudden this becoming so innate that it is the first thing you think of, to where you stop and you're able to process through all of this? So does that make sense? I know that's kind of a long-winded question. And then I want to come back to as well, like after you answer this, I want to come back to what you had said about the next best thing. So I guess, and I'm notorious and guilty for this, for like asking 7 questions in a row, so I'll remember them. But first, I think, for the person that's like, that's really great for you that you developed that over a period of time, but the greatest struggle that I've got is building enough intentionality to where I'm able to catch this, stop it, and redirect. Before I know it, the whole roof is gone.
Yes. Yeah. And I'm gonna give a really annoying answer, and an answer that, I'll be totally honest, I was privileged to be presented with. You need reps in a type of practice that resonates with you. So one of the things that drives me nuts in, I guess, like the world of self-help is like this nebulous talk of like gratitude practice, or just the power of meditation. And I would say what happened with me is, when I went into rehab, I got to basically taste test everything. So I woke up in the morning and I did a meditation practice with some friends that was guided meditation, just first thing in the morning, trying to connect with your breath. we were forced to do gratitude journaling and like gratitude exercises each day. For me, where I actually found the greatest power was in writing, in the written word. And so I journaled a lot, like very private journaling, especially heavy in rehab. And again, talking about sort of like you have to sample the buffet and figure out that thing that really works with you. And then honestly, the way it worked for me was just like dive in. And so I found that outlet in writing. And if you look at my journals in rehab, each morning it was pages and pages and pages and pages because I had so much backlog to deal with. And I was just trying to place things like in their proper order and understand like, why am I even here? Why is this happening to me? Why do I think this way? And just through the sheer work of journaling and again, investing in the activity that resonated with me, I started to see patterns. And I actually slipped into one early in the podcast. One thing for me, one thing that's a flag is like falling into these statements of saying something is always this or never that. That was a huge flag for me. And when I discovered that, what I started to do, and another thing I found power in, was telling people that were closest to me, like what some of those tells were. And I kind of started calling it sort of like my alcoholic mindset. And so I can be in a conversation with my wife today, and if I start spewing out a bunch of always, she's there to catch it. So that if I don't, so it's like an added safety net. I'm getting good now that I've written it out, could see it on the page for me and recognize it. I'm getting much, much better in the moment at catching it, but I still have that ability for my wife to be like, hey, are you listening to yourself? I'm hearing like a lot of always and like your black and white thinking.
So here's what I'm hearing you say from this. There's a couple of things. For really moving from, my gosh, I can't get into enough of a rhythm to even catch myself to make these changes as bad as I want them. Number one, it's just intention. And this, we talk about this all the time in our program, that everything when you begin is going to be challenging, but the idea is that you move from intentional to subconscious choice. In other words, you're so intentional with it in the beginning that over time that just begins to become subconscious because you're so used to it. And so when you're trying to create behavior change of really any kind, at first it's going to seem very difficult, but if you want to get in the habit of creating that behavior change, be it with food, be it with sugar, be it with being nicer to your spouse or nicer to your kids or a better parent, whatever it is, it's always going to have to be, and this can seem really kind of unpopular, especially among men, but intentional. You're going to have to sit down in the morning. It's going to be slow. It's going to be quiet. It's going to feel boring. You're going to feel like there's a million other things that you've got going on and should go do. But if this thing is important to you enough, you'll have to create the time to move from intention to subconscious. The second thing that I'm hearing you say is I love this word. There's a book that I love that uses this word about exactly what you're talking about. There is a benevolent grace for yourself. We're great about giving this to other people, especially people that are close to us, where it's like, oh, I screwed up. I am so sorry. You're like, oh, no problem. No problem at all. Total accident. Whereas if it's us, it's like all this negative conversation about how much of an idiot you are and how much harder you should work. And all of these really macho social media accounts have not helped that at all. I mean, there's a big difference between being lazy on a couch and then just browbeating yourself because you can't measure to a standard that doesn't exist, but that's a different podcast. There is a benevolence there to not be perfect out of the gate. And this overlaps in your story. It overlaps in the people that we see in the sense of, look, when you start week one, I don't expect at all for your nutrition to magically change overnight and this to become easy. It won't. In fact, it'll be really hard. But there is a benevolent grace there that says, oh man, that's That's all right. It wasn't perfect, but man, it was way better than last week. And that bleeds into the point three that I'm hearing you say, which is I'm going to do the next best thing. And that says, look, I may not be able to, like, if we were to use this in terms of, let's use nutrition and something else like parenting. I may not be able to nail all of these perfect macros that I keep hearing about and train for 180 minutes a week, but I can try to eat less ice cream after dinner to once a week instead of 6 times a week. Or it's tough for me to put work aside, but I'm going to go home. And as much as my brain is screaming to take care of the weeds around the lawn, I'm going to play baseball for 20 minutes with my kids at least. Right. And there is that is doing the next best thing. And I love what you say about this in terms of it's like, okay, I didn't bat 100, but I'm not going to go back now and try to impose something extra rigid as a payment for those sins. I'm not going to hyper restrict in the future to wrong those rights. I'm just going to basically give myself the benevolent grace, is what we're saying here, to do the next best thing. Start today, another day. And I love that because you are 100% right. The minute that you pigeonhole yourself into always thinking you are screwed, because there is no always. As much as we want to believe, and like we say this all the time on this podcast, but I would rather be consistently good than occasionally great. I do not care what you see on social media, and we have the privilege of working with a lot of these cool people behind the scenes. Nobody's batting 100, and they can portray whatever they want. They are not batting 100, and so the more that you can get into the thinking and the idea of, I'm going to do the absolute best that I can today, and tomorrow I'm going to recommit to that, and then tomorrow I'm going to recommit to that, or as you say, which I think is great, I'm going to do the next best thing. You will, and you can tell me if this is true and what you found, you will begin to build routine like that better than I'm all in. I'm done with
Yep.
X, Y, and Z from the past. I'm all
Yep.
in.
And that's how I was with alcohol. And I was all in with the standard and expectation for myself that was unattainable. And I was all in for other people. Like I wanted to get sober for my wife. I wanted to get sober for my family so that I could prove to them, so that I could show them, who I truly was, what I was truly capable of. And the benevolent grace was the foundation for my entry into recovery. And it plays out in two ways. The first is when I was sitting alone in the intake room in recovery, or I'm sorry, in rehab, it was the most fearful I've ever been in my life. And we'll get into, I'm sure, the rest of the story, but bar none, that moment, I was the most fearful. And I made myself two promises, and one of them speaks to this. One promise that I made was every single time that I passed a mirror in the facility, I had to stop. I had to look directly into my own eyes in the mirror, and I had to speak out loud, I love you. And I forced myself to do it every single time. And it was literally the words caught up in my throat the first 3 times that I attempted to say it. And I had a hard time making eye contact with myself from the alcoholism. Like my eyes were bloodshot yellow. My face was just like, you could see the damage that had been done. And I had a hard time looking in the mirror. And then it was just this like slowly, and then all of a sudden it clicked. And one time I said it, and I had this realization that I actually meant it. And the love was not this prideful love, and it continues not to be this prideful, boastful love, but it is grace, I think, is the perfect word. Like the love that you extend to others. A huge part of my journey was that I didn't love myself. I wasn't doing sobriety and recovery for myself. I was always doing it for someone else because I didn't actually love myself. And then the ironic thing is my capacity to extend love to others was limited because of my disdain and hatred for myself.
Okay, I want to stop you there because one of the things that, and I want to go back and kind of cover an introduction to your story too,
Yeah, we kind of
but
jumped in.
no, I think it's great. But one of the reasons that I thought you would be such a great guest in this context in terms of being on a nutrition podcast, and we've not really covered anything about nutrition, but what I've tried to like somehow strategically weave in, I really don't care to be honest with you, is is the I would say one of the most interesting and unexpected outcomes and observations that I have seen in the years of doing this is, and I did not expect this, was the number of people who stop drinking in our program. And the cascade of thinking generally goes like this. It's all right, I'm going to stop drinking because it is such a substantial number of calories. And so, in an effort to conserve calories and to reach this outcome, I'm going to cut it out because of that. So, they begin by reducing. And then they'll start noticing that, okay, well, the reduction was nice and I actually started feeling better. So, what happens if I just don't have anything at all? And so, they'll cut it out altogether. And then the most interesting comment, and I like I've mentioned this before, I think one of the coolest things that I've seen in this is their wives will later reach out thanking me like I did something, and we both know I had
Yeah.
absolutely nothing to do with it. I didn't do any of
Yeah.
that work that comes
Yep.
with this, right? But um, the husbands will say as they're going through this process, and we'll read this through their analysis sheets and their check-in calls, etc. They'll say like everything about my life has improved, and what they'll mean is I'm making the bed, I'm helping out around the house, I'm trying to be more intentional with and involved with my kids. I care more about things. It's like one decision bleeds over into every area. So the question that I have for you and in your experience is, why do you think that happens? And that's twofold. One, what is it about alcohol that makes a person not care as much? Now, that is a broad statement, and it's not to say like your person that's enjoying a beer with dinner doesn't care about their family or make
Right.
their bed
Right.
or do the laundry or
Right.
whatever. But for so many people to say, look, I was never necessarily an alcohol abuser, but even when I quit, I noticed this. What is it, number one, that you think it is about alcohol that sort of drives some people towards, I don't even know what word to put there, but I think you know what I'm saying. And then number two, what is it about not that causes that discipline or whatever bleed over into all these other areas that start improving?
Yeah. I think with regards, I think there's two different avenues and stories here, like very high level, because there's one where it's, your clients where they enter into some sort of program, they have showed the desire and likely the willingness to enter into this. And it's I think the discipline, my assumption is like the discipline and structure that would come from that then allows them to, I feel like it's likely addressing fears. Okay. So when you step into a coaching program or an engagement or relationship with someone like yourself, it's like that takes a lot of courage. And people, I hope people do recognize that, because it's something along the lines of you realize that things are not as good as they could be. And I think it's that thought pattern that sort of ties under all of it, and will lead, and then you start doing difficult things and you start bringing that discipline into your life. And I think the other thing is just paying attention, like especially knowing the entry into your programming, it is really just starting to pay attention. And I think when people start paying attention to alcohol consumption, whether they are an alcoholic or someone who has a normal, more so healthy relationship with alcohol, I think you can start identifying some certain things, like even small increases in anxiety the morning after, feelings of regret. You don't waste that time anymore. sort of like stewing in that. Obviously, there's the like acute effects of alcohol while you're drunk. I'm actually going to largely ignore that. But I think it just comes from that willingness to be like, for, people that are coming through your program, it's like life could be better in some way. And it feels like a natural merge with just like addressing and questioning their alcohol consumption. There's a lot to be said about just starting to face your fears as well. So we have a mutual friend, Zach. He is about as steadfast and normal in his relationship with alcohol. And it's been interesting being on this journey kind of together. Zach stopped drinking the day I went into rehab. And he's had no problem staying away from alcohol. However, we talk a lot about it. He's brought up some fears that he has, more so from the standpoint of the stigma that alcohol brings. And so it's like, well, if I reject a drink at a work event, are people going to wonder if I have a problem with alcohol? And so it's these like incremental sort of like optimization that he has gotten out of it, where it's like he wasn't drinking enough to wake up each morning just like filled with regret or anxiety. But over the long term, he has started to see like these points where it was like, well, I was doing this because I was fearful. Our topic or our conversation earlier, I was doing this to make someone else not feel bad about themselves drinking. I did want to mention one thing, because in my state, coming at sort of this like betterment, life betterment opportunity, I guess, I knowingly stayed away from programs like yours, because I knew my drinking was so catastrophic to my health. It was kind of like, what's the point? It would be a waste of money. Like supplements were a waste of money for me. Programs like yours, where it's like really making these step changes, they were all a waste, because I was just scratching and working so hard to like maintain the baseline of my health and fitness, my physical health and fitness, while, my emotional and spiritual fitness just totally crumbled.
Yeah. I mean, I think that at the end of the day, I mean, we're obviously talking about it in the context of alcohol because of your experience and then my observation. And I thought this just makes such a great guess. But in reality, and this is going to be really unpopular, but it's the truth. And it's been my observation in working with people. It's been my observation in my own life. It's been my observation in friends' life. When anything gets out of balance and starts taking your time and your attention and your whatever, it doesn't matter if it's work, it doesn't matter if it's hunting, it doesn't matter if it's exercise. I mean, we do these death hikes, but truth be told, they suck so much time for training up that, even as much as I love them, thank goodness they are only a segment of the year, or I would never be home for my family. But the reality is that anytime anything, good or bad, gets unbalanced and starts to take more space in your head, more thought, more time, and it's not going towards either you, whatever you need to be sane and to have however much time you need to put attention towards what matters, which, conventional wisdom says is your family, if you have one, or yourself, if not, or whatever. It's unhealthy. And so the minute that you start putting that thing where it belongs, immediately everything gets better. And it's not it's not a math, it's not like a math equation as to why that works. I want to go back to kind of what you were talking about with Zach, because the other comment that these folks would make is not only that their lives, etc., would get better, but it was just sort of surprising to them how many people they knew or started to recognize in their own life who did not also drink. And so, it is funny though that you're right, where we often will make decisions either to make someone else happy or to often not want ourselves to feel awkward. And this shows up like a drink. You go to a work party and you're like, well, no, I really don't want to drink, but I also don't want to feel awkward standing here sipping water and you asking me why I don't want a beer. So sure, hand me a beer, I guess. It shows up even in, dude, I'll give you an example. We just moved. We have some awesome neighbors, and the kids have like our oldest Grant knows no strangers. I mean, that dude gets on his
Yeah,
bike.
yeah,
I'm
that's
like,
right.
I look down the road. He's at these people's house he's never met, introducing himself, wanting to play with the kids. And so we go down there, and they hand us these. Man, I hope they don't listen to the podcast. Strawberry lemonade. And it was good, but it was really sweet, sweeter than what I used to eat. Calories aside, sugar aside, don't care about any of that. I just did not, it was not sitting with my stomach. But I kept sipping it because I didn't want them to wonder why. Or is he not drink? Does he not like it? Is he not, is he so healthy that he won't do this? And it was none of that. It was simply because I didn't want them to feel bad. I didn't want to feel awkward. So I guess I'm going to drink it. And there's so many things like that where if we would just be comfortable and confident enough, I'm going to give you a quote after this too, to just do what we want and let the outcome be what it's going to be, I think life would go a lot better. There is I don't even know what his official title is, but his name's John Deloney, and he does a podcast. He's pretty big. He's grown quite a bit over the last 5 to 10 years, but he deals a lot with just situational, social, emotional type of stuff. He has this quote though that I love, and it says, choose, let me think about this. He says, here it is, choose guilt over resentment. And what he's saying in that is, look, in my scenario, he'd say, I would rather say, I'm not going to have any, I just don't feel really good right now. And that stuff usually doesn't sit on my stomach very well. Versus I do an action because I'm worried about that person. I leave and now I resent them as though they forced that upon me, if that
Right.
makes sense.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And so I think, yeah, it's just, again, goes back to that point that you had made earlier, which is the benevolent grace to say, you know what, I would let these people off the hook if they told me they didn't want X, Y, or
Yep.
Z thing. I'm going to let myself off the hook here and trust, look,
Yeah.
if you're genuinely a good friend, good family member, whatever, then you'll be all right with this. And if
Yeah.
you don't, then you're going to learn to be all right with it real fast.
You hit on a huge couple words in the recovery space. So if you don't mind, I want to add one to that. So guilt and resentment. So resentments kill alcoholics. Two of the steps in particular are to sit down and literally list off every resentment that this is of the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. List off every resentment that you hold. The first time I did it, I had 17 pages written out. So it's like, it is so burdensome to carry this around with you. And one thing that I want to interject or highlight that I feel like I have learned, I think people should look at guilt, feelings of guilt, as actually a net positive versus feelings of shame. Because when I was drinking and when I was in the throes of my battle, I was ashamed. Shame is I am a bad person. Guilt is I did something bad. It's really easy to deal with I did something bad. Again, go back to, okay, do the next best thing. Maybe it's apologizing to someone. Maybe it's giving yourself grace. Maybe it's just walking away. But that shame eats you. And it was constantly there. Like I would, even just being with my family, like this is very hard to talk about, but it's like being in the presence of my family, feeling them like expressing love. It's like, I could not accept it. I couldn't take it because I felt so much shame about who I was, the behaviors that I was exhibiting. And so I've really pushed to like delineate between the two because I mean, in my case, it was life saving, right? I saw the shame. I worked through it in a big way by clearing a lot of the resentments and forgiving myself in a lot of instances. And then I monitor for moments of guilt. And it's like, if I'm guilty about something, I'm trying to get really quick about rectifying that. And again, most of the time, it's an apology for something that I have said. Because again, I still deal and live with the thought patterns of, kind of that like alcoholic, or that comes with the alcoholic mindset.
I love this. Lindsay has a quote that she said that I loved, and this goes back to us dating, and I won't get into the story, but she says that shame loses its power when it's fully known and you're still fully delighted in as a person. I think it loses its power over you when you see someone doesn't hate you or whatever. I have no idea how this turned into an emotional podcast, what it did, but it's good, and I'm gonna keep coming back to this. Shame loses its power whenever it's fully known, yet you are as a person are still fully delighted in. I think it gives you a lot of freedom to know, like, wow, someone still cares about me, and so there is so much freedom in that part of it. And I think that's huge because in what we see, and obviously ours is related to nutrition, it's not always about alcohol, is people feel so guilty for not being so not batting 100 all the time. And again, this all goes back to what we sort of laid the foundation with, which is that benevolent grace, not trying to bat 100, not using words like always, and aiming for consistently good as opposed to occasionally great. One thing that I want to kind of go back to is you started talking about your time with your family and how you would feel shame and you would feel guilt when you were in the throes of your alcoholism. It was actually a conversation that you and I had that you were still doing your podcast and wanted me on for, but that's about grief. So if we can kind of go back, and I'm just going to kind of read what you said in quotes. It says, but I'd like to talk about the process of dealing with grief from your own experience, as well as what you've seen in your practice, and if or how our culture's inadequacy of dealing with grief can lead to longer terms ramifications like emotional instability, drinking, etc. Can you talk a little bit about kind of what led you down this path and just kind of the whole background story
Yep.
and your process with grief?
Yes. Yeah. And thank you for the invitation to do so. As you'll, anyone still listening will find out it's a very near and dear topic to my heart. So, the Blitz version of this is I battled alcoholism largely alone in increasing isolation, for 12 years. So the longer it went, the more and more I withdrew, the more and more my wife and I withdrew. May 15th of 2023, I walked through the doors of an inpatient rehab facility. So that means I am there locked down for 28 days, turn over wallet, phone, no outside communication outside of a 15-minute phone call once every couple days, and we got an hour and a half for family visiting hours every week. I threw myself into that, and then coming out of it, I did some outpatient work, just really working on the transition back into life. Felt a lot of momentum, felt a lot of determination, and honestly felt fear coming out of rehab, because my life was so terrible and agonizing going into that rehab experience. Like it had come down, the decisions for me had come down to death, which I was afraid of. This is going to sound weird, but I didn't have the courage to take my own life. But it was on the list of ways to control my drinking. It was rapidly becoming one of the only choices. And thank God, even though I tried to like passively drink myself to death, it didn't work. And my family, my wife, was able to get me through the doors of rehab. So I was scared about what life might be like living in recovery. 57. So during my time in inpatient, during one of the family visits, my wife informed me she was pregnant with our second child. She's scared. She's crying. I'm elated. It's a very confusing, mixed conversation because, even though she's talking to me, she doesn't know the level of determination that I have to really set myself on the path of recovery. And honestly, one of the things that led to so much shame in myself in the last few years was how horrible of a father I saw myself as to our, at that time, 1.5 year old, also named Grant. And so there was a little bit of an aspect of I get another chance at being a father. I get to come out of here. I get to pour everything I can into Grant. I can never make up for that year and a half of his life where I was battling and not there and numb. Um, but there's another life coming into our family. 57 days after leaving rehab, my wife and I went in for a routine checkup on the baby and found a growth, got pushed on to specialists really rapidly, genetic testing, some scares of actually losing the baby at that 16-week mark. And then come to find out our child, who was a girl, we named her Lucy, she had a very rare form of Noonan syndrome. And I knew we would have an uphill battle when we were sitting with the geneticists and they were going over, what it meant, what Noonan's was, how it might present. And they handed us a chart and it had all the genetic variants of Noonan's and then like typical ways that they present. The form that Lucy had, there was no data. And it was because they hadn't been able to collect. It was so rare, they didn't have like significant data to support any sort of conditions. Like she'll have this sort of heart condition or, this sort of facial expression. And so seeing that chart was just like, okay, we face an uphill battle. From that condition, we found out a few weeks later, she had a heart defect called tetralogy of Fallot, required immediate surgery after birth, followed by surgery a few months later, and then surgery again a few years later. And so just continually getting information. And it was like every checkup we went to every single week was more health concerns. We started finding fluid in areas of her body where it shouldn't have been. So because of the heart condition, we actually could not deliver her here in Boise. So we had to move, and we moved back to Minnesota where there was a heart clinic that could perform the surgery on her. And we moved in mid-November. We actually moved on the 6-month anniversary of my recovery date. And so it was really interesting because I go to my AA meeting and I've been staying in my recovery practice this whole time. I go to my AA meeting and I get my 6-month like chip. And it's kind of like, I don't know what's in store for us. Like it just really felt like we were being put through this pressure cooker of stress, unknowns, and really faith. And that's a huge foundational piece of this whole story. When I walked into rehab, I had given up all sense of a belief in God. I just totally dismissed it. I saw there was no possible way with all this suffering that has gone on in my life and in the world that there could be a God. Like, why would he allow this? Through my recovery journey, I started opening myself up to that idea. And then actually, when we found out about Lucy's health condition, I had a moment, and I'm going to say it the same way I said it before. For me, on the spiritual front, it happened slowly, and then it happened all at once. And words truly cannot capture what I experienced, but the easiest way to say it is like I saw God in such a profound way, and I saw his hand at play in my life in such a manner that I'm never going to question my faith again in the future. It became embedded within me. And so we left, we went to Minnesota. Again, it's basically like 2 to 3 doctor's appointments a week as we're waiting on the delivery of our daughter. Her due date was January 26th, December 14th, which was my 7-month anniversary of sobriety. Wife's water breaks. We go in the hospital. she does not deliver Lucy on that day. She actually stayed pregnant with her for 6 more days. Lucy had fluid in her lungs. They wanted to give her lungs as much time as possible to develop, to give her a chance. Lucy was born December 20th in the OR and was immediately transferred. She was stabilized as much as possible, transferred immediately to the NICU where she was stabilized. And we stayed with her. Truly, by her bedside, we got into the Ronald McDonald House that was on the same floor as the NICU. And we spent every moment that we could with her. But the fluid in her lungs had really hurt her chances at survival. And on December 27th, she gave us the signs that, her fight here was over. And Alyssa and I were with her. We were with her as she departed. And, from that point, for anyone who has lost, and I know this having engaged a lot with folks that have lost children, your life just gets split into a before and an after. And so we started trying to figure out, what does navigating this grief period, what does this look like? And honestly, I found myself very attracted to other people who were open about talking about their hardships and their grief, because what we found was, in leaving the hospital, we felt directionless. We felt and saw that, like, as great as our medical establishment might be for like certain conditions, I got this growing sensation that, like, we don't really know how to grieve. Like, how is someone supposed to deal with such hardship? And then layer on top of that, how am I supposed to think about, like, I'm in early recovery. Like, when I would be in an AA room and people would hear about all the stress, all the health concerns, they were coming up to me and grabbing me and just being like, "Are you okay? Do you want to go talk? Like, call me anytime." And it was kind of like, I appreciate that gesture, but, like, again, going back to this moment with God and just his ultimate faith, that ultimately became and transitioned from my ability to sustain myself in recovery to our ability to navigate through this period of grief. And so 2024 for us was, in a very large way, just trying to stand on our feet again, trying to understand how, as beautifully imperfect as it was, to grow together as a family through this hardship and through this period of grief. And in a big way, it was engaging, and it was engaging with a community, and a community who had traveled the road before. Because what I started finding out was, like, there's sort of a language to loss, and there's a shared experience that happens. But we were very lucky to find sort of this community, and in a big way, we approached grief in a very similar way that I approached recovery, and a huge component of that is the community. So in my recovery journey, it's AA. In this period of grief, it's finding other people who are open to talking about their losses. We got to go to a specific, like, child loss retreat where we met and formed bonds with other families. And yeah, it's confusing. It's difficult, but ironically, death and loss is the one thing we're all guaranteed to face, yet we seem so oddly inadequate to face it as like a culture.
Yeah, I mean, there's,
And that's
really
heavy,
not.
I know.
Well, it's not that. It's not that. There's just really no way to follow that up, right? Because you basically covered it all in such a great way of recounting your experience with Lucy and then afterwards. And I think, I think what's maybe most remarkable, I think there's several things remarkable about what you said, and people can take that away from this, which is number one, throughout that entire process, you never return towards this thing. Like you had this resolve to learn to cope in another
Hmm.
way, to find other outlets. And in my experience, that when people go that, like what you keep calling the slow route, which I would define as, you learn the process, you learn the playbook, you learn tools, you lean on those tools, you take the time in the morning to be intentional until it becomes
Yep.
subconscious, as opposed to just rushing to get to the end point, right? Process
Yes.
versus the end point. So that when you're exposed to these things again, whether it's grief or anxiety, anything that causes us to be redirected towards our habits and our addictions. And that's not always alcohol. Some people, that's food.
Yep.
There's a lot of
Yep.
different things, right? That when you have those tools, you can learn another way. And so, like, it almost goes back to exactly what you had started in the beginning, which is by saying, look, I had to be intentional about developing these things. It didn't come easy, and I think that there's a perception that some people have it, whatever it is,
Yeah.
and they were
Yeah.
born with it, and it's not. It is. I've not met anyone born with it. I've met a lot of people who have, through different means, developed it, whether
Hmm.
that's sitting down in the kitchen table in the morning and creating it, or
Yep.
whether that was forged through something difficult like military basic training or special forces training or whatever. It is forged some way, but you are not born with it. And
Hmm.
if you are somehow born with it, it can be learned. And I think that that's the beautiful part of it, is that when you go what you're calling the slow way, you develop the tools, and so that when the challenge does expose itself again, and it will, in one way,
Hmm.
shape, form, or another, they're there. You don't have to
Yep.
be fall to the level of your addictions. Number two, maybe even more profound, is that you embraced it, right? And
Hmm.
so you embraced this community, which is what you keep talking about. And
Yep.
I think that's awesome for this podcast and the people listening to this, is because most everyone who listens is involved in something, whether that's
Yep.
a hiking group, a through hike, a hunting community, and you've got hunting partners, buddies, whatever. You've got people you do ultras with. You've got all. Most people are going with someone on this,
Yep.
right? Which means that to some degree, if it's not a grief support group, it doesn't need to be that formal. To some degree, you have a community somewhere. And
Yep.
I think, like, men especially, and it's not only men who listen to this, but a large percentage of them, men especially, don't feel like that. Like, they don't feel like they have that. And I think that, and this is my own experience, it is often there, but you have to accept it and you have to lean
Yes.
on it, right? And for some reason, I'm not a psychologist, so I don't know the reason, but there's a variety of reasons that we just don't want it, right? And
Yep.
it's like we'd rather try to hoe the road on our own. And I agree with you. And in our conversations, me with the death of my dad, and then obviously what um, you and Alyssa went through with Lucy, have experienced a tremendous amount of grief, and the ability to cope with that, as ugly as it is, I think is key. And I
Yeah.
again, I applaud you, because I think, again, it was just forged through those seemingly little things, which are really the big things.
Yeah. No, they absolutely are. And something with regards to grief, and I look at, again, there's so many parallels, shockingly, between the recovery journey and walking, would all say, like, walking through and walking with grief is, one the component of our culture that upset me the most when it came to grief was this move on mentality. Now, no one said it explicitly to us, but we heard others who dealt with it. Sometimes you pick up like why haven't you moved on? And I don't think that's a choice. And this realization came through, again, the work that I did with my addiction recovery. I mean, the number of times I've said the serenity prayer and focus on what you control and what you don't control. I don't think we have the decision to just set our grief, the burden and the weight of our grief on the side of the road and walk the path forward. I think it is a burden that you have to figure out how to carry. I realize and recognize I wasn't carrying it alone. That's the community. That's my relationship with God. That's my marriage. So it was heavy and it was burdensome. But the interesting thing, again, as we progressed along the path, that grief, the only way to communicate that this is like thinking of the burden as like carrying that rock. But then all of a sudden you realize that this grief and this burden has actually built you around you this resilience and this almost like protective coating where it's like you have traveled this road with it and it has strengthened you in a way you didn't realize. And there are so many times in life now when I hit a point where, say, like the desire to control or something is going a way that I don't want it, where I can pause and reflect back on like our journey and know what we are capable of moving through. And again, it's like we just had to face up with it time and time again and truly just do it. Like Lucy just showed us how we just had to strip things down to one day at a time. And there were moments shortly after her loss, especially, where the most incredible thing that we did was place our feet on the floor and get out of bed in the morning. And we recognized that. Like that was so difficult sometimes, but even facing those seemingly small difficulties, we just built this capability around us, in this community around us.
One of the things I want to kind of wrap up on was something else you said in our conversations with one another, which was how much physical movement and good nutrition really helped you. And you kind of also commented on those being two things that are sometimes lost in sobriety communities, and I would
Yes.
argue a variety of
Yep.
other different ones.
Yeah.
I'm curious, kind of, I mean, it's probably really easy to give a basic answer here, so feel free to do that if you want to, or feel free to elaborate. But I'm curious what role that had, not just in getting to a point where you battled that journey, but even now in sustaining it.
Yeah. So I very specifically have what I call my 5 practices of recovery, but they got incorporated into our grief journey as well. The first is movement. And movement was just so fundamental and foundational. I did it in rehab. I moved. I tried to sweat in some way every single day. I look at each day and just, it doesn't have to be just like a crazy, difficult, just pouring sweat type workout, but movement is kind of the starting point for me. It was something that I could control. Yes, I had to make a decision to do it, but I was the one capable of moving my body. And so that's why it was like really that first entry point. And just to cover them, the practices that I follow are movement, gratitude, vision, community, and spiritual connection. And again, those mapped in my recovery journey, just as well as my individual and shared journey with my wife and family, through the grief and loss of Lucy. And just having gone through both those experiences and seeing how imperative it was, it's something I don't give up. And to the point about being forgiving and graceful with yourself, there are days that I don't work out and I forgive myself. I don't usually allow 2 days to be strung in a row where that happens. but I mean, I'll even count, taking the dog on a longer walk or something like that. Just move your body with some level of intention. Um, and then for me, at least, the movement coupled with just the lack of drinking has brought everything in line from a nutrition standpoint. Because I'm sure you see it all the time. It's like sort of, at least the mindset I've fallen in is like, I don't work out so that I can eat poorly. It's like when I work out, I aim to do it in the morning so that it is kind of like that sustained primer for the rest of the day and for my decisioning the rest of the day. And so that has been fundamental for me.
I love I love all of that. So number one, I love that you have these five things, and often people like when they start a program like ours, and I'm not trying to promote our program at all. It's just that a lot of people are trying to accomplish something, and they have targets every day, actionable things that they do. Most people feel like they want 7, 10, 12 actionable steps every day. These are my macros. Here's my protein goals. I want this supplement. And we don't do that. What we say, look, here's three things. If you do these three things every day, I guarantee you that you will see the outcome that you want. So you're trying to solve all problems with just a couple. Now, the thing that's I think the most interesting to me, because we get a lot of questions now about like standing desks and walking treadmills under our desks and some of this stuff. And I'm fairly unconventional in a lot of ways than what you hear about like with influencers online.
Yes,
One of those is
yes.
like, no, I hate them both. And here is why. I would rather you get away from the computer, have no phone, no podcast, no music, no, go for a walk. Even if it's 10 minutes, let your brain sort of settle and refocus. And again, I think if you create that margin, this whole idea of forming something subconscious that moves from, God, this is agonizing for me to sit here and be intentional with this all the time. Why can't it just come natural? It will, but not until you pay the piper and not until you are intentional. And I always give the metaphor of like a ridge when you're hiking or when you're hunting or when you're trail running or whatever. It's like getting to that ridge line is awful. But once you are to the ridgeline, it's fairly smooth. There's not a lot of change, right? And this is very much climbing to the ridgeline until it becomes subconscious. Now, I grabbed my phone as you were talking because there was a book that I read that I love this, and this to me sort of really identifies our culture right now, which is maximum efficiency. Let's
Yeah.
become as efficient as possible.
Yep.
The problem
I
is
drank
that
that way, by the way.
you what?
I drank that way. I looked highest ABV, and it was just all about efficiency.
So yeah, we are always thinking about efficiency. The problem is that it's shrunk margins for our ability to become
Yep.
intentional or subconscious about anything. So this
Yep.
book, I've highlighted two quotes. It says this. Number one, let's see. So there's three separate quotes. All of this becoming, and he's referring to technology and being more intentional, is resulting as an assault on our attention. It has robbed us of ordinary transition spaces and opportunities. As soon as there is a down moment, we are back trying to fill our schedule with something to become more efficient, and it's usually on our phones. Let's be honest, though, we will need to loosen our grasp on efficiency. It's often what drives us to remove all margin from our lives and to fill every moment. And it's especially hard on relationships. So, this is what I love that he says, because this is very, very hard, but very, very good if you can do it. So, we embrace a little inefficiency in our lives. So, what if you're late to the carpool? It's not a massive issue. So what if you have to wait an extra day for you to reply to their email? It's good for you and probably good for them. And that's the idea. I don't care about your walking desk. I don't care about your standing desk. I care about you getting up off of a screen so you can think and so you can form an idea and you can start to move from intentionality to subconscious. And so I love the fact that you're like, look, I got five things every day. And those 5 things vary in intensity. Some days it's really difficult. Some days it's a walk. Some days it's whatever. Some days it's something else. There is not an always all about it. And so that's an awesome thing, I think, to cap on. And I think that if we all had our 3 or our 5 or whatever, we would start to notice an improvement in our habits and, of course, therefore, our outcomes.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a very innocuous story about inefficiency from rehab, seemingly innocuous, but it broke my brain. It was about my 3rd or 4th day in, and I had a morning routine where I had to go and get my medication from the pharmacy on site or from the nursing station. Then I would stop by my room, grab my stuff, and then I would come to the group spot. I realized I was trying to optimize my route for the least amount of steps, for the least amount of time to complete all those tasks in the morning. And one morning, I told myself, I'm going to do this as backwards as possible and break it. And so instead of making like a smooth line around the facility, I was zigzagging and like making a star pattern. It hurt me. It hurt my brain to be inefficient in that manner, but it unlocked something within me, to your point, that actually starting to take the time and be present is really what it came down to in those quote unquote inefficient moments. They've unlocked so much for me. My wife and I have talked about this numerous times. The greatest return that we have gotten in me being in recovery is our time, energy, and creative spirit that we get to bring into our lives, that we get to bring into our relationships. And I mean, it's exploded in a manner that I never could have fathomed. And yes, in a very weird way, being inefficient, being purposefully inefficient was key to that.
Well, thank you, man, for coming on and sharing your story and all of your wisdom that you've gained over a super hard road. And I'm sure that there will be a lot of people that listen to this to take a lot away from it. So thank you.
Means a ton. Thank you. I just if you want one thing I had thought of, if you want a title for this, you could call this like the Burnt Buns podcast, because I feel like we realized we had a lot to talk about when we were by the grill. And I just remember like totally over toasting the buns because we lost track of time. Like a Burnt Buns podcast kind of has a nice ring.
We'll call it that because that's probably where this started from.
I know, exactly. It means a ton.
Big thanks to Kyle for taking the time to be on, as well as just to share all of his experience, share his story about his daughter Lucy and with his family and the takeaways that he had here. And like I said in the beginning of the show, if you're interested in getting a hold of him, I'll put his contact information in the show notes and you can reach out to him. If you've got any questions that you want to ask us and us to cover on a Q&A, you can send those to us at info@v2pnutrition.com. If there's topics or guests or really anything that you want to hear on here, that's what we like to cover. You can send those to us as well. If you would take a couple of minutes and rank the podcast or leave us a comment, that's tremendously helpful. If you want to check out any of the resources that we've got, we will link those in the show notes too. This is releasing in late July, which means it's like 6 weeks out from a vast majority of the bow hunting that's going to begin. Most people that are doing through hikes are either on trail or coming off now or getting ready to go on for sections of it. So you guys are kind of in the peak prime time to be thinking about some of this stuff, and hopefully you can find good resources from us to help you do that. You can always send me an email too if you got personal questions. I'd be glad to help. We will be back again in another couple of weeks with another new episode. Have a great week, everybody.